I was born in Los Angeles in 1938, so I'm Sansei, which means in Japanese, the third generation Japanese American. I'm also a hibakusha, a word which I will be using frequently. And it means, it's a Japanese word meaning A-bomb survivor. And as it happened, I was zero point 0.8 mile from the hypocenter, which is considered pretty close. At the same time this bomb was taking place, actually my older brother and myself, we were separated from our parents who were incarcerated in Poston, Arizona in the United States. Right now, I belong to an organization called ASA. It means American Society of Hiroshima Nagasaki A-Bomb Survivor. I'm one of the directors there, and this organization used to number in excess of 300 a number of years ago, but now we have dwindled down to about 100, out of which only about 50 are still actively participating. My journey starts in January 1940. We received words that our grandfather, who was at that time living in Hiroshima, was gravely ill, and he was not expected to survive much longer. So we packed up in exactly January. We went to Japan on this ship that you see in front of you. The passport picture, I'm that little guy, the youngest of the four, sitting on my father's lap. And you could see us on the shipboard. Also noted is one thing to note is that my mother, although it's not visible, she was 8 months pregnant at that time. And we went, left San Pedro Harbor, landed in Yokohama, and went to Hiroshima. That's a picture of my grandfather on the left. When we got there, he was indeed gravely ill, but because of loneliness, I guess because all of his sons were in the United States, he took to drinking in excess and his health was declining. But when we got there, he started to behave himself and his health improved significantly. Our original plan was to stay there for about half a year. And we had a wonderful reunion. You could see us probably in the early March timeframe, just about now, what would be 1940 would be 82, 81 years ago. We're having a nice picnic, and you could see the cherry blossom trees in the background, which had not yet bloomed. And I just heard today from people in Hiroshima that cherry blossoms are indeed in bloom right now, and they will be beautiful shortly. I'm that little guy holding my mother's hand. If you see the cursor or with the red dot, that's me holding my mother's hand, and my uncle on the other side holding sake bottles. So we really must have had a good time, although I'm sure that they didn't feed me any of that good liquor. My grandmother is on the far upper left. She's the one that raised us when we were in Japan. Now, as I mentioned earlier, my mother was 8 months pregnant. So when we arrived in Hiroshima, she gave birth to my younger brother. His name is Albert. And I'm the guy on the right side of the picture in front of my father. And this is my grandmother on the next picture over. And when our parents left us, my grandmother and my grandfather were the one that took care of us and helped us survive the terrors of the first A-bomb in Hiroshima. This next frame of pictures is in June of 1940. My parents had to return to the United States because there were some business issues. However, they had all intent to return back to Japan to take care of my grandfather. Um, so they left us in care of our grandparents, and they returned to the United States with my youngest brother, Albert. Unfortunately, before they could return to Japan for us, the war started and they were incarcerated in Poston, Arizona internment camp from 1942 to 1945, along with 110,000 other Japanese Americans sent to the various camps. I think there are a number, about 10 of them, all over the United States. And this is in Arizona. And you can see a picture on the right where my parents and my younger brother, who had grown a little bit since birth, in front of the barrack that they were living in. And that barrack, I think, there is shared by 4 or 5 different families. So it was a pretty miserable living at that time. Now, I want to fast forward to August 6, 1945. We went to sleep the night before, and then during the middle of the night, around 1:45 a.m., you could see the B-29, Enola Gay, taking off from Tinian Island with the atomic bomb destined for Hiroshima. And you can see over here, about an hour before, around 7 or 7:15, the reconnaissance aircraft, which went before them, surveyed the fact that the Hiroshima had wonderful weather, and it was a prime target for the dropping of the A-bomb. So the confirmation was given that Hiroshima would be the target. Now, during that time, around 8:15, we got up and we got ready to go to school. It was a beautiful Monday morning, and we had school in those days in Japan, even during the summertime, no summer vacation. And on the way to school, we were told that the school was canceled because there were enemy aircraft still in the neighborhood, and that we were to return home. So happily, we ran home, and we changed into our play clothes when we heard that there was a B-29 headed towards Hiroshima. And usually when the B-29 came over there, you could see the vapor trails, beautiful trails high up in the sky. So my older brother and I, stupid as we were, we climbed on top of the roof. So we had a separate shack adjacent to the main house, which housed a bathhouse. And on top of the bathhouse was a flat roof on which my grandmother dried her laundry. Anyway, we went on top of that, watching the distant vapor trail coming over towards us from the southeast direction. And luckily for us, my grandmother, who happened to be a lot smarter than us, told us to get off the roof immediately. And as we gradually came down and went our separate way, the bomb went off. Now, this is an aerial view of the map of Hiroshima on the left. Ground zero is that famous dome that you see. In those streaks running through the city are rivers. And the tip of the black arrow on the top is where we lived, which is 8/10 of a mile from ground zero, in a junction of 2 rivers right here. We're very close to it. It's easily identifiable. And when the bomb went off, I went underneath the bathhouse below the rooftop. I didn't see the flash, nor did I hear the boom. I was knocked out instantaneously. And I'm not sure how long I was out, but when I came to, the whole building was on top of me and the things were beginning to burn. But luckily, I was not seriously injured, and I was able to dig myself out. And as I dug myself out and went towards the courtyard, I found my brother who who was outside of the gate of the house, but he only had a minor burn, small radiation burn on his forehead, right on top of here. And but he was okay. My grandmother, after scolding us, she went back to the kitchen to wash dishes, and she was facing the window when the bomb blasted, and all the shards of glass embedded into her body, and she was buried underneath the kitchen. And when we went towards the kitchen, we saw our grandfather and a couple other men trying to dig her out of that area. And finally, when they dug her out, she was bleeding pretty badly from all the wounds that she received, but nothing fatal. In the meantime, everything around us were completely flat and beginning to burn. And we thought, oh, a small bomb must have hit our neighborhood, not realizing that the whole city was devastated. My grandfather and a few other men developed a bucket brigade, tried to put out the fire, and it was a very futile effort. But he told my grandmother and us to escape westward towards, there's a road on top of this, adjacent to this river, and go westward towards the mountain where things were not beginning to burn. So my grandmother took us on by the hand, and we escaped towards the road. But as we got to the roadside, we saw hordes of people escaping from the inner city, trying to escape in the same direction. These people had terrible, terrible injuries with clothes burned off, skin dripping from their bodies, bones protruding from the various parts. Some even had guts hanging and holding onto the guts to try to keep it in. Many had already died on the roadside, and some have already collapsed, begging for water, ready to die. But we escaped through the sea of carnage towards the mountain to escape the burning city. This particular picture was taken about 1.5 miles outside of Hiroshima. And we were 0.8 of a mile, so it took us another half a mile to get to this vicinity, although this is not the area. This is a photo taken by a newspaper reporter and displayed at the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum. And I got permission to use this photo for my presentation. But this is the way it was. While we escaped towards the foothill of the mountain, and by the time we got to the foothills, in the open area, we saw soldiers lining up the dead bodies in a nice, neat row. From the foothills, we went through the rice paddies and escaped northward as the black rain, which consisted of lots of radiation, dust, and particles rain upon us. And we walked ever west northward, trying to escape from that devastated area. We found a train station, a functional train station, which was running. So my grandmother boarded us on the train, and we went to an area called Kabe, which is, I believe, several miles due north of the hypocenter, where we had our relatives, and we stayed there until the end of the war, which is only 9 days after that. Bomb was dropped on August 6th. Japan surrendered on August 15th. And shortly after the end of the war, we returned to our home area, and our hometown is called Yokogawa, small little town. It's a part of the Hiroshima city. I always tell people that in retrospect, I've had 4 devastating periods in my life. First one certainly is the one when the bomb dropped. Second one is when we returned to Yokogawa, where we used to live. And everything, when we returned, the whole city was flat. This is a panoramic photo taken by the US Army somewhere in the middle of the city. And it's looking all the way around the city, and you can see the city has already been destroyed. Nothing is standing except for non-combustible items. You can see the dome in the background there coming. There were still number of charred dead bodies still laying around. And it's really stink up the place. There were constant cremation of individuals as the bodies were collected. And the cremation took place 24/7. And really the stench of the cremation, even today, turns my stomach. Now, when we returned to Yokogawa, since nothing was standing, those structure in the back is something that we built afterwards. We lived in the air raid shelter, which was basically a hole in the ground that was built as an air raid shelter, about 10 by 10 or so, and we gathered various items that we could make a structure, non-combustible items such as sheet metals. Oh, let me go back to here. You could tell here that this is me on the right, my grandfather, my brother. By this time, we had lost our hair from radiation and we had terrible dysentery. And my grandfather would die from cancer in 1947. This is probably in the winter of 1946, maybe several months later, front of our shack. This is my grandmother here. My aunt, who was just outside the city, returned to live with us. And you'll see her a little bit later when we return to the United States. This is a picture of one of my classmates. Went to a place called Misasa Elementary School. And notice several things to note here. The school is completely destroyed. You can see the metal frame of an auditorium in the background. And you can see here that there were several classes of people, at the various ages, probably ranging from 10-year-olds on down. I'm not sure how many of my classmates did not make this picture class photo. Many have died and many were seriously wounded. I'm that guy over here on the top right, third from the right side. That's me right here. Let me take a moment to give a destructive toll. Just in the first hour, 70 to 80,000 people were killed. By the end of that year, by the end of 1945, that number will double to about 140,000. And by the end of that decade, the number will total 200,000. Not only do we have death, but we had infrastructure destroyed and thousands suffer physically and emotionally from the injuries they got from the A-bomb. However, we were lucky, all 4 of us survived. But on my maternal side, my parents, my mother's side, they were not so lucky. My grandfather and grandmother, on that morning, they went to the city to sell their produce. And my grandmother's body was never found. She was completely gone. Body never heard, or the body was never recovered. My grandfather was seriously injured in the head. Evidently he had a serious head trauma, and he was able to make it back home to an area they used to live about 3 kilometers from the hypocenter. But he would die a month later. My uncle, who at that time of the bombing was a teenager, had serious burns on both of his legs, but he also made it. In Poston, Arizona, my parents, they got a hold of a newspaper article that showed an aerial photo of the city of Hiroshima with the ring of destruction radiating out. And they found, much to their horror, that we lived right at the center of the first ring, which was a total destruction. And they had no hope that we had survived. However, they contacted several organizations to make a search for us. And through the American Red Cross, a number of months later, they found us, and my parents were told that we had survived. Now, my parents and Albert, and actually I had another brother by that time, they were released from the internment camp at the end of the war and given $25 apiece to start a new life. And they decided to go to Los Angeles to carry on. In March of 1948, it took them 2.5 years to save enough money after being released from the internment camp to buy a ticket to send for us. However, when my brother and I were told that we had to leave Hiroshima and go back to the United States and live with our parents, who we don't remember. As you recall, they left us when I was only 2 and my brother was only 3.5. So we didn't want to go. We wanted to stay with grandmother, who nourished us, saved us, and raised us. But however, with much shouting, crying, and kicking, they put us on a boat bound for San Francisco in March of 1948. And we came to the United States at that time. Now, here's a picture of us. My older brother, Kenny, this me on the second one here, is the one that was born in Japan. And this guy here is my youngest brother, Alan, who was born at the Poston, Arizona camp. And this is my aunt, the one that lived with us in Hiroshima. She also came to the States. Transition to American life was pretty tough. First of all, you didn't get along with our brothers who were invading their territory that they had for all themselves. We didn't know the language. I had terrible time at school, first half a dozen years, trying to learn the English language, which is very difficult. People whose only knowledge was Japanese. And even Japanese wasn't that good at that age. I had nightmares, and I had an eating disorder. I couldn't eat anything that had a pink or red in it, like pasta marinara, tomato, or so forth. Anything that reminded me of the gore that I had witnessed. But through the years, by the age, maybe 10 years later, I was in pretty good shape. This picture was taken in 1950, around 1950. You could probably tell because of this thing in the background. That's a television for your younger people. And that's what television looked like with knobs, which you don't see these days. Anyway, I went to school here in Los Angeles. Matter of fact, I grew up in right next to Glendale. I went to Washington Irving Junior High School, which is close to Fletcher Drive and San Fernando Road. I used to take the rec car to Glendale to a movie. I think it's called Alex Theater. Every Saturday morning they had serials, Tarzan or Tonga, the Jungle Girl, and so forth. So I think I could consider myself a Glendale person. Anyway, I went to John Marshall High School in Los Feliz area, and I went to UCLA. At UCLA, I studied engineering. I got my master's degree in computer, specializing in computer architecture. I met my wife there. We got married, but before we got married, I told her that I have a serious background and that I may not live that long. But she married me anyway, and even to this day, I guess I've surprised her in that fact that I'm 83 now, 2 days ago. But about 5 years later, something terrible happened in that we had 2 children at that time. And my oldest son, at the age of 5, developed cancer and he passed away. And we always wondered whether my background has something to do with that. But hopefully it did not. But now, married for 58 years, I have 2 healthy daughters, 4 grandchildren, 2 boys and 2 girls. That concludes the story portion, but I want to spend a few minutes now and give you some concluding remarks. These are my opinions, but I'm going to spend about maybe 5 to 10 minutes on this if you have the time. Now here you see a picture of 2 bombs. These are the 2 bombs that were dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This bomb that was dropped in Hiroshima was called the Fat Man. We have 75 years now for the scientists to develop, improve, and mass produce these atomic bombs. The bombs that are available today are up to 4 orders of magnitude. Now, 4 orders of magnitude means 10,000 times more powerful than the ones that were dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's hard to imagine the capability of these bombs. Now, here's a computer simulation. It's an application you could get on the computer called Nuke Map. And I created the simulation here, which takes a 1.2 megaton, which is contained in the Minuteman missile in the United States. If that were dropped in the middle here of Los Angeles, the yellow region there where Glendale is, you would suffer the same kind of effect that I had as 0.8 mile from ground zero. It's estimated that that bomb will kill 680,000 people and injure 1.7 million people or more. Now you can imagine the destructive capability of this one bomb. For these guys was more than will cause more damage and kill more people than COVID-19 in 1 year period. However, you take a look at 2020 estimate of global nuclear warhead inventory. United States and Russia have about 6,000 of these guys. Altogether, that'll be totaling in excess of 13,000 bombs of various capability. The biggest bomb that was ever tested was Russia. It was a hydrogen bomb, and they said it was 10,000 times the power of the one that was dropped in Hiroshima. It's hard to imagine for me that we would need all of these bombs in this world. And all these bombs are there for deterrent possibilities. What are we deterring against? If there's enough bomb here to destroy the world several times over. I read in yesterday's newspaper where United Kingdom, they're going to raise their stockpile to 260. It's a pretty scary situation. There's been a number of treaties and agreements signed by countries and group of countries, but many have been broken. I already talked about the pandemic killing capability. The thing that worries me is that the global political climate is getting worse. People are getting more aggressive, and they're becoming more confrontational. You listen to some of this world leader and it makes you shiver, or at least it makes me shiver. And I could imagine a single deranged leader, for whatever reason, could push a button and start a chain reaction that could cause a similar event to happen that happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now, one thing about pandemic is that which is kind of encouraging is the ability of the countries and the scientists of the world to get together to develop the vaccines to fight against it. What I would like to see is a worldwide cooperative effort with some kind of intensity to ensure the future safety of the world from nuclear weapons. Now, I've been sharing my story like this for a number of years. I'm not sure how many presentations I've made. Sharing as many other hibashas have done before me. And we're sharing our stories of terror, horror, misery, death, and destruction so that people understand the horror of nuclear weapon and to send a strong message to the leaders of the world to stop the proliferation of the nuclear weapon and then end nuclear warfare altogether. The Hibakusha's hope. All of us hope that we are the last to be called Hibakusha. We hope that there'll be no one else in the world, in the future generation, that it will be designated as a Hibakusha again.